Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're not baking today, but we are in the kitchen because I do want to talk about something that we use a lot in baking, and that is chocolate. We use chocolate all the time. Whether you're making chocolate chip cookies, or maybe you're making brownies, or you might be making a German chocolate cake, you're going to have to use chocolate at some point. Now, chocolate comes in a lot of varieties, a lot of different ways you can incorporate chocolate into your baking. Chocolate and cocoa products come from the cocoa bean, and we just process it differently, we use it differently, and we need different forms of chocolate depending on what we are baking. So if you do have hard chocolate, like your chocolate chips or your bars, I don't have any bars right now because I used them all and I haven't been to the store, but the chocolates that you see here also come in bar form. So whether you have loose chocolate chips like this, or whether you have bars, so I have like tiny squares left of my bar, but that's all I have left of my bars. But whatever you have, chocolate should be wrapped tightly in foil or some kind of resealable plastic bag to keep the air out of it, and should be stored in a cool, dry place, and typically it can be stored for 9-10 months, and then you might want to get rid of it if you haven't used it. Why you wouldn't use your chocolate up in 9 or 10 months? Don't know. I use my chocolate frequently. I typically have to replace my chocolate every 2 months because I go through it pretty fast. So one thing I want to talk about before I talk about the different types of chocolate is, you notice this chocolate here has kind of a white coating on it. There's nothing wrong with that chocolate. A lot of people will throw this out. It's not mold. It's not anything that is bad for you. So it's basically the bloom. So if you see kind of this grayish whitey coating on your chocolate, that's the bloom. That typically happens if chocolate is stored in too warm a place. And yes, I did put this in the wrong cupboard. I stuck it up above the microwave instead of putting it back in my baking cabinet. I just did that because I thought I was going to use it really fast. And it turns out I didn't. I left it up there for a few days, and then after a couple of days, this happens. Because what happens is this is actually the cocoa butter in your chocolate. The cocoa butter rises to the surface if your chocolate is kept at too warm a temperature. So that's what I did. It was an accident. I had meant to use it up faster, but then I forgot about it, and it was up there for a few days. That happens. So the cocoa butter will rise to the surface. There's actually nothing wrong with that. In fact, if you take a piece of it, that's why this is separated. If you take a piece and you break it, you'll notice the chocolate's fine inside. It just looks a little bit weird. But the bloom doesn't affect the flavor of the chocolate. So if I eat one of these chocolate chips, and I'm going to, tastes exactly like it should. It doesn't change the flavor. So it's fine. When it's used in a recipe, the chocolate will regain its original flavor. So if I throw this chocolate in a chocolate chip cookie, when that cookie comes out of the oven, the chocolate chips are going to look like this. They'll look normal. So there's nothing wrong with that chocolate. You can eat that chocolate. You can use it in your baking. Don't throw it out. Just because you stored it improperly does not mean it's bad. Now, obviously, if you store it at too high a temperature, it'll actually melt. So if you have melted your chocolate, then you're going to have to chop it up to use it. But even then, it is usable. So as long as your chocolate doesn't have anything else wrong with it, if this is the only problem you've got, you're fine. You can still use it. So chocolate comes in countless forms and varieties. And I'm just going to pick up this chocolate chip here, and I'm going to eat it. Yeah. I love chocolate. Most bakers do. So chocolate comes in countless forms, a lot of different varieties, all of them yummy. They're very yummy. Because they differ in flavor and performance, sometimes you have to use the right kind of chocolate. So if a recipe tells you to use semi-sweet chocolate, you might not want to use milk chocolate the first time you make that. So, chocolate chips, okay? If a recipe calls for chocolate chips, you probably want to use real chocolate chips, not some kind of chocolate flavored ones. You want real chocolate. So these are milk chocolate here. This is semi-sweet, and these are mini chocolate chips. So if you are baking and it calls for chocolate chips, you can probably use a variety of different types unless it's specific on the type. So if it tells you semi-sweet chocolate chips, then you would use semi-sweet chocolate chips. But if it just says chocolate chips, you can probably use any chocolate chip as long as it is a real chocolate chips. Chips are available in sizes from mini, like these little guys. I just ate a bunch of them. This is a dangerous video for me. I'm going to end up eating all my chocolate. Anytime something hits the ground, I eat it. So you can get, I just do. So you can do anything from a mini chocolate chip to chunks to regular chips. So these are chips. I have a mix of chocolate chips and chocolate chunks in here. So you can use a variety of different things. There are several different flavors. There's semi-sweet. There's milk chocolate, like this. There is white chocolate or mint flavor. This is actually mint flavored white chocolate over here. There's a lot of different options, and you can usually sub them out unless it's very specific. I have to let the dog in. One moment. Dog is barking. Yes, sometimes we have to pause videos because there's animal stuff happening. I'm not pausing the video. I'm just going to keep going. Dogs happen. So, you can usually, if it says chocolate chips, you can usually just use whatever chocolate chip you have. If it says semi-sweet, use semi-sweet. If it says mint chocolate, you could probably sub that with anything. Doesn't matter. You can also get vanilla milk chips, and they're similar to white chocolate. So these are technically vanilla mint chips, except they're mint flavored. So these are vanilla chips, white chocolate. You can use that too. So if you have a chocolate chip cookie recipe and you'd rather have mint chips, use mint chips. It doesn't matter. You also have other types of chocolate. This isn't the only kind of chocolate we use in baking. Though if it was, that'd be great because we just eat it all. I shouldn't be making this video. I'm just going to eat all these. Anyway, so often you will use chocolate syrup. Okay? Now, this is the brand that we have here in Canada all the time. I think pretty much everyone has this brand. Of course, you may have a different brand. It doesn't matter. This is chocolate syrup. You can use it to make chocolate milk. You put it on sundaes. You can bake with it. So if you are asked for chocolate syrup, you want something like this. It's a combination of cocoa, corn syrup, and flavoring. And it's used a lot in certain types of baking. You probably won't use it a lot if you're just making cookies, but other things may ask for chocolate syrup. This is what they mean. They really do mean the chocolate syrup that you use to make chocolate milk. That's what chocolate syrup is. So semi-sweet chocolate, that's what this stuff is. Actually, these are semi-sweet too. So semi-sweet chocolate is unsweetened chocolate with sugar, extra cocoa butter, and some flavorings maybe. You can get it in blocks, chips, bars. This is semi-sweet. Semi-sweet melts pretty well, and it's a really good middle-of-the-road chocolate. So if it calls for dark chocolate and you don't want to use dark chocolate or baker's chocolate, you can actually sub out semi-sweet. Semi-sweet can be used in place of pretty much all the chocolates. You can't always use milk chocolate because it doesn't melt the same. You can always use semi-sweet. So this is kind of the go-to guy. So he would be what you would use if you're not sure what to use. Default to semi-sweet. So sweet baking or cooking chocolate is not here right now because I used it all. But usually you get that in a bar, a larger bar, and you break off pieces. It's also called German sweet chocolate. It's similar to semi-sweet, but it has a higher sugar content. And it's available in bars. It's kind of we shave off some off the side. You can get that as well. You can get unsweetened chocolate. This is the basic type of chocolate from which all others are made. It is molded into 1 or 2 ounce blocks and packed in 4 to 8 to a package, depending on the size of packages your local stores carry. I don't use it too much because it's actually kind of bitter. But you absolutely can use it, but I don't. Because if I'm going to do something bitter, I'm going to go over here anyway. So now we'll talk about, since I pointed to it, unsweetened cocoa powder. This is not sweetened. If you are using cocoa powder, you do not want sweetened cocoa powder. Forget sweetened. You want to go with unsweetened because usually you're adding a bunch of sugars and everything. So just go with unsweetened cocoa powder. This is pure chocolate powder with no ingredients added. Powdered drink mixes containing cocoa powder, sugar, flavoring, and sometimes milk solids should not be used as a substitute for unsweetened chocolate. So sweetened chocolate is fine for making like a glass of chocolate milk if you wanted, but you need unsweetened for baking. Always buy unsweetened. Always, always, always. This is really common in a lot of your cakes and a lot of your brownies. You'll use cocoa powder a lot. So I buy it in large quantities because I need it in large quantities. It is really good for shelf life, so it'll last a very long time, so it's okay to buy it in larger quantities unless you think you're never going to use it. So, nice big package of that is wonderful. White chocolate isn't really chocolate at all. It's a blend of cocoa butter, sugar, milk, and flavorings, and is available in blocks, bars, other shapes like chocolate chips. This is technically white chocolate. This just happens to have mint flavoring and coloring added. Typically when you see chocolate that has a color, so whether it's green, maybe it'll be blue or yellow, that's white chocolate. Obviously, this wouldn't take dye very well. So colored chocolates are usually just white chocolate, sometimes with flavoring added to them. White chocolate contains the greatest amount of cocoa butter. It actually has no cocoa powder in it, really. It's just cocoa butter, sugar, milk, and flavorings. It's not really chocolate at all. There's no chocolate. There's cocoa butter. Okay, cocoa butter is white, but there's actually no chocolate in this. Well, we call it white chocolate because it does have cocoa butter. Usually they are vanilla flavored, so they're just a neutral white chocolate. They're very sweet. So these are mint. You can add different flavorings to it. They're a very neutral chocolate. So if you are making some kind of blondie or something and you wanted to use white chocolate, it actually is very easy to add a flavor to that because it's pretty flavor neutral. It's just very, very sweet and quite delicious. These are good. Seriously, I shouldn't make this video. When it comes to melting chocolate, don't do it in the microwave. I will admit, sometimes I do it in the microwave. You shouldn't. It doesn't turn out well, and it's really easy to overdo it, which is when you end up with your chocolate starting to clump. Also, milk chocolates don't melt very well. So if you have to melt chocolate, I wouldn't do this. I would go with semi-sweet. If you have to melt something, melt semi-sweet. It melts really, really well, and it's really easy to melt. I would not do it in the microwave. Sometimes I do, but you shouldn't. Bad idea. So what I do is I actually have this little, move you out of the way. I actually have this little chocolate melter. That's what this is for. This is just a Betty Crocker chocolate melter. That's what it is. But this melts chocolate really well because this whole sleeve comes out. You fill this with the chocolate you want. You put it in the heated base and it just slowly melts it for you and it keeps it at a really good temperature. That's a really good idea if you're going to melt a lot of chocolate. You can melt it in a double boiler on a stove, which is basically a pot in another pot with water in the pot at the bottom. I'll show a picture in case you don't know what a double boiler is. You could do it in a double boiler on your stove, but if you're going to melt a lot of chocolate, this is kind of the way to go. So I would recommend grabbing yourself one of these if you're going to do a lot of chocolate melting, because I do a lot of chocolate melting. So this is better than the microwave and better than the double boiler. But if you have a double boiler and you're not going to melt that much chocolate, just use the double boiler. Skip the microwave. It doesn't melt great in the microwave. It's really easy to melt too much. So these are the different kinds of chocolates you might find yourself using in your baking. And there's also a lot of flavored varieties and a lot of different colors. You can do a lot with chocolate. Once you start working with chocolate, it's delicious, it's fun, and frankly, it's really easy once you really start doing it. So remember which chocolate you want to use. Semi-sweet is your default because that's what's going to be the most versatile. Don't use milk chocolate for melting. It doesn't melt very well. These guys are designed to hold their shapes. Chocolate chips hold their shapes because that's what they're designed to do, so they're not always easy to break up. It is easier to melt your bars, even if they're little bars. It is easier to melt bars than it is chips because chips have an additive to keep them from melting. Keep them from losing their shape, rather. They melt, but they hold that shape. So it's really hard to melt milk chocolate chips. So I wouldn't try to melt chips. Melt bars, or you can get coins. Melt something that's designed for melting. It's a whole lot easier on you. That's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. Hope you enjoyed the chocolate. See you tomorrow.